So, World War II is over, but a new kind of conflict is just starting to heat up, a Cold War. And one of its very first, most intense flashpoints was all about one city. Today, we're jumping right into the incredible story of the Berlin Blockade and the absolutely mind-blowing operation that saved a city, the Berlin Airlift. Okay, just think about this for a second. This was the massive, almost impossible question staring down the Western Allies in the summer of 1948. You've got West Berlin, this little island of democracy, completely surrounded by Soviet territory. And suddenly, every single road and railway is cut off. The people inside, they have just a few weeks of food and fuel left. What do you even do?
Well, the solution they came up with was as brilliant as it was insane. They decided to supply the entire city, everything from coal for their power plants to candy for the kids, completely by air. At its peak, an Allied plane was landing in Berlin every 30 seconds. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a huge, defiant statement to the whole world.
But wait, how on earth did Berlin get into such a dangerous spot in the first place? To really get the blockade, we've got to rewind a bit, back to the end of the war, to see how the victors carved up Germany. It all goes back to these big meetings at Yalta and Potsdam, where Germany was officially split into 4 occupation zones. But the really tricky part was Berlin. Even though the city was way deep inside the Soviet zone, the capital itself was also split 4 ways. And check out that last point from November 45. The Allies had a solid written agreement for 3 air corridors. But access by road and rail? That was just a verbal handshake deal. And that turned out to be a massive problem. So this table, it just lays it out perfectly. You can really see what a strange situation this was. West Berlin, the American, British, and French sectors, was this tiny little island totally surrounded by the Soviet sector of Berlin, which was itself surrounded by the giant Soviet zone of Germany. It was a geographical accident waiting to happen, and it set the stage for one of the Cold War's biggest showdowns. In the years right after the war, that whole idea of the Soviets and the West working together just evaporated. They had completely different visions for Germany's future, and it basically created a powder keg. All it needed was a spark. You can pretty much see how each of these steps just made things worse. Stalin wanted a weak Germany that he could control. But the West, especially with the Marshall Plan, wanted to build a strong capitalist West Germany to block the spread of communism. So when the Western zones started merging and planning for a new West German government, Stalin saw his control over Germany slipping through his fingers. He felt like he had to do something drastic. And this right here, this was the final straw. It all came down to money. The old German currency was basically worthless. So the West created a new, stable currency, the Deutschmark, to get their economy going again. But when they introduced it into West Berlin, the Soviets saw it as a full-blown economic attack. This was the move that directly triggered the blockade. So, with the new currency lighting the fuse, Stalin made his big move. He gambled that he could squeeze the Western Allies out of Berlin just by cutting the city off and starving it into submission. On June 24th, the trap snapped shut. The official excuse? Get this, technical difficulties. Yeah, right. Soviet forces shut down every single road, railway, and canal into West Berlin. In their minds, the West had only 2 choices: give up the city or start a war. They never really considered a third option. And let's be clear about the human cost of this political gamble. We're talking about almost 3 million civilians, men, women, and children, who are now essentially hostages in their own homes, completely cut off from the world. And don't forget, this wasn't some town right on the border. West Berlin was a tiny democratic dot 100 miles deep inside a sea of Soviet control. The isolation was just absolute. So, faced with this totally impossible situation, the Western Allies, led by the US and Britain, came up with an impossible solution. An operation so huge, so complex, that nothing like it had ever been tried before. They were going to supply the entire city from the sky. Just take a second to let these numbers sink in. Over the 15 months of this thing, Allied planes flew in more than 2.3 times million tons of supplies. You can see the US Air Force did the lion's share of the work, but the British Royal Air Force's contribution was absolutely critical too. Together, they literally kept a city alive from thousands of feet in the air. So what exactly were they flying in? We usually think of food, right? And that was hugely important. But look at this breakdown. Almost 2/3 of everything they flew in was coal. coal to run the power plants, coal to heat people's homes through a freezing German winter. Without that coal, Berlin would have gone dark and frozen.
This number just blows my mind. Over 250,000 flights. Can you imagine the logistics? The maintenance crews working around the clock, the pilots flying in terrible weather, the sheer human effort to pull this off for 15 straight months is just incredible. It really was a city in the sky. But this story isn't just about the numbers and the airplanes. It's about the people on the ground, the Berliners who had to live through this, and about these small acts of kindness that became huge symbols of hope for everyone.
West Berlin's mayor, Ernst Reuter, gave this incredible speech to a massive crowd. You can just feel the passion in those words. He captured the spirit of the Berliners. They were not going to give in. And their incredible resolve gave the Allies the political motivation they needed to keep the hugely expensive airlift going.
And then you get these amazing human stories, like this one. There was an American pilot, Gail Halverson, who saw some kids by the airport fence. He gave them his last 2 sticks of gum, and he was so touched when he saw them carefully share it that he promised he'd come back and drop candy for them. He told them he'd wiggle his plane's wings so they'd know it was him. Pretty soon, Uncle Wiggly Wings was a hero, and other pilots joined in, dropping tons of candy on tiny handmade parachutes. It was a small thing that meant the world to those kids and became a powerful symbol of goodwill. The Soviets really thought the airlift would fail. They figured there was no way the Allies could keep it up, especially through the winter. But they were wrong. By the time spring of 1949 rolled around, the airlift was running more smoothly than ever, and Stalin's big gamble had completely backfired. So after 323 days, the Soviets quietly gave up. The airlift was just too successful. And on top of that, the West had started a counter-blockade that was really starting to hurt the East German economy. On May 12, 1949, the roads opened up, the blockade was over. But the crisis left some permanent marks. The division of Germany went from temporary to permanent, leading to the creation of West Germany and East Germany. The Soviet threat was now so clear that it directly led to the formation of NATO, the military alliance that defined the Cold War. And West Berlin? It became this powerful, enduring symbol of freedom, right behind the Iron Curtain.
The airlift was this amazing triumph of logistics and sheer willpower. But it makes you think, right? In our world of cyber warfare and digital infrastructure, what would a modern blockade even look like? It probably wouldn't involve roadblocks. What are the new vulnerabilities we need to protect?
But the struggle over Berlin? Oh, it was far from over. In fact, things would get even more tense just a decade later. To see how that all played out, you should check out our next explainer on the construction of the Berlin Wall. You can find it in our Cold War playlist below. And hey, if you subscribe, you won't miss the next chapter. Thanks for watching.